So some good questions asked this week for the question and answer video. So ranging sort of wide variety of questions. So let's go at it. So here's the first one, which is an important one, which remains important in the contemporary environment, where we have a 50-50 Senate currently. So when senators die unexpectedly, like Husting, the Wisconsin Democrat, the guy that was in the hunting accident, what kind of special elections occurs? Normal state Senate elections are determined by the governor of the state himself, because Irvine Lenroot, who's this man over here on the right, replaced Husting. Husting was a Democrat. Lenroot was a Republican. This is, those of you who've had me in class before know that this is a theme that I mention a lot. The contingency often can have unexpected effects, and here is one. So Husting has this accident under Wisconsin state law. A vacancy in the Senate was led to an immediate special election. And so there's an election that's held in the spring of 1918. Irvine Lenroot, who's the leader of the conservative wing of the Republican Party in Wisconsin, very divided ideologically with the state's Republican Party, narrowly wins the primary. The Democratic nominee is a former Wilson aide, who we will encounter again in this course as a kind of ineffective U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, a man named Joseph Davies. But there's also a third person in the race, Victor Berger, who was a Milwaukee congressman, who is the first socialist ever elected to the U.S. House, and who is running in 1918 while under indictment for violating the Espionage Act because of his anti-war activity. He'll be convicted, but his conviction will be overturned by the Supreme Court. The ultimate result here is that Berger and Davies split the left-leaning vote. So Berger carries the kind of pink counties here, Davies the blue counties. You can see Lenroot is very strong in rural parts of Wisconsin, and Lenroot is elected with 38% of the vote, giving the Republicans the majority in the Senate after the 1918 midterm elections. But that's not a requirement. In fact, the Constitution is utterly silent on how new senators or replacement senators emerge. So, for instance, in a state like New York, it's the governor who makes the initial appointment. When Hillary Clinton was appointed Secretary of State by Barack Obama, the then governor of New York, David Paterson, got to pick who would replace Hillary and chose Kirsten Gillibrand. And then under New York law, the appointed senator has to run the next scheduled election. In some states, it's an absolute governor's appointment. Here's a list of the recent Senate appointments since 2008. So in some cases, like Wisconsin, it's a special election. Sometimes the governor appoints, and there's the candidate that has to run in the next scheduled election. That's what happened with this woman, Tina Smith, who replaced Al Franken from Minnesota. In a handful of states, Wyoming, for instance, has this this rule. The governor appoints, but has to appoint a member of the former senator's party. So in Wisconsin, in Wyoming, excuse me, the way it works is that, let's say it's a Republican senator who dies. The state Republican Party, and there's a Democratic governor, the state Republican Party picks 3 people that the state party would be happy with serving as senator, and the governor has to choose from one of those 3. So you can't have a party switch in the middle of the term. So this is, this wholly depends on state law. There is no federal oversight here. One of the very first instances of an appointed senator, a man named Gerald Nye, there's a question of whether the governor has the authority to appoint, but the courts basically say, the states can do whatever it want. So Wisconsin has this system, which I think probably more states have this kind of system than any others, which is a special election, but one that will occur immediately, and it leads to this, history-altering result. Second questions dealt with Haiti. What was the particular mission of the U.S. in Haiti besides securing American influence? And did the NAACP criticize FDR on other grounds other than Haiti, and was Harding the first president the organization campaigned for? Two good questions. The answer to the first is kind of the $64,000 question with regards to Haiti. Is there really was no mission. It's almost as if the mission became the mission. That is, that the U.S. sends troops. They send troops partially for economic reasons and partially because they want to ensure U.S. strategic predominance in the Caribbean basin. But then increasingly, this is a group of U.S. Marines in Haiti in 1917, and this is Marines drilling in Haiti. And here again, we have Haiti on the map in 1918. Increasingly, the mission becomes to protect the sanctity of the mission. So, for instance, there's a Haitian uprising in 1919, so the U.S. sends more troops to Haiti to ensure that the U.S. is not kicked out militarily. So, there's this saying called mission creep, and that's when the U.S. has a military intervention and it just sort of stays that way, and no one really rethinks it. Afghanistan, to a certain extent, was fit this category, but Afghanistan was nothing like Haiti in that there were concrete strategic interests. In Haiti, by and large, by a year or so after the intervention, there really wasn't any strategic interest in the interventions. Just sort of continued by inertia. With regards to the NAACP was a sharp critic of Woodrow Wilson, which is not surprising because Wilson was almost certainly the most racist president of the 20th century. And this is a period in U.S. history where more Black voters are Republican than Democrat, and this is a legacy of the Civil War, where Black voters correctly associate the ending of slavery with the Republican Party. The Democrats, throughout this period, at least until the 1930s, are a party where the Southern branch is very, very powerful, and there's segregation and Jim Crow. So that the NAACP would criticize a Democrat at this point in history was not particularly surprising. That they would do it on a foreign policy issue, that was surprising. But by and large, up until this point, the NAACP had focused on domestic matters alone. But the leadership's argument, and I think they were correct in this regard, was that the organization had a special obligation to stand up for Black countries overseas as well, because these countries really had no popular support within the U.S. While signing the Treaty of Versailles, did the Allied powers not think that making Germany pay the reparations would cause a schism in relations between the nations, or did the benefit outweigh the negatives at the time? This is a very good question. I mean, this is sort of the key question in 20s and even early 30s European diplomatic history, because the reparations were part of this broader scheme where the Treaty of Versailles was a very harsh treaty on Germany. So that caused, difficulties, caused a schism, it's a good word, in relations between the nations. But it wasn't so harsh that it completely destroyed Germany's ability to sort of involve itself militarily. And the key person here is this guy, Georges Clemenceau, who's the premier of France. And Clemenceau's basic approach to this question is that the benefits outweigh the negatives because it ensured that France got some money immediately. There was no long-term thinking on the part of the French government or really, I think even the British government with regards to reparations. And this is one of the great failures of the treaty. It caused constant tensions between the two sides in the early 20s. I'll be talking a little bit about this in the snippets for next week. It also helps pave the way for a financial system that facilitates the collapse of Germany's democratic government in the late 20s and early 30s. What did the reservations that the Senate asked to be made for the Versailles Treaty consist of? Why was Wilson so against making compromises with the reservationists, especially if these compromises could have increased his chances of getting the votes in favor of the treaty? This is another good question. A mistake by the instructor, who will go nameless. I really should have talked about this in one of the snippets. There are a whole array of reservations, ranging from the mild reservationists to the strong reservationists. Individual senators put together a series of reservations. The most significant reservations are 14 reservations to counter Wilson's 14 points that are put together by Henry Cabot Lodge, who's the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. Lodge is what what's called a strong reservationist. That is that Wilson could have gotten, I think, if he had just done a little bit of negotiating, I think he easily could have gotten the mild reservationist, and that would have gotten him up to around 61 or 62 seats in the Senate, but he still would have needed some of the Lodge bloc. And these two reservations in Lodges 14, I think, kind of sum up the range of reservations. So down here at the bottom, this is a long reservation that basically says, look, the U.S. is going to views as a domestic issue all of these questions: immigration, labor, tariff, drug and opium trade, that in theory could also be viewed as international and might theoretically fall under the League's jurisdiction. We're saying right off the bat, no, these are just domestic issues. League has no jurisdiction over them. European powers had no problem with this at all, and indeed, I don't think you can really sort of interpret the League of Nations covenant as restricting a country's right to regulate immigration policy. So this was a strong reservation in that it checked the power of the League, but this was a power that the League almost certainly never was going to have. Now, the top reservation here, which is reservation number 2 of the Lodge 14, this is more substantial. The U.S. assumes no obligation to preserve the territorial integrity or political independence of any country, blah, 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 under the provisions of Article 10, unless Congress authorizes the use of force that it declares war. Wilson adamantly opposes this because he says, look, this is going to undermine the principle of collective security and deterrence, because a country, again, say Germany in 1914 planning to invade Belgium, this kind of country, they won't know if the U.S. is going to come to Belgium's aid because this removes the uncertainty. The European powers privately say, look, we're fine with this. We just want the U.S. in the League. And indeed, here I think Wilson really overstated the threat, because every country is not going to automatically act solely on the basis of an order from an international organization. There has to be some political mechanism to get that approach. So, I think if you think about it in retrospect, Wilson could have compromised even with the Lodge reservationists if he had wanted to do so, and it probably wouldn't have changed the treaty all that much. But Wilson believed these reservationists were acting in bad faith, and the reservationists believed that Wilson was acting in bad faith, element of truth to both sides. And so there really were never any meaningful negotiations between the two. And that's all we have for this week. Keep the questions coming. These were all really good ones. Be well, and I will see everyone for the snippets for next week and for the first of our discussion sections.